Hello everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar, SunSmart in the Workplace. I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania and I will be your moderator. Before we start, please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. I will now explain how you can participate in today's webinar. Please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit questions at any time during the webinar. Questions will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. Only presenter webcams will be used and today's webinar is being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenter, Duncan Giblin. Duncan is team leader at Cancer Council Tasmania. Duncan has a strong focus on increasing awareness of occupational health risk and increasing people's confidence in adopting behavioural change. He is a sitting member on the National Cancer Council Australia Occupational and Environmental Cancers Committee. Duncan has previously worked in the civil construction, fishing and building industries. This background is his motivation to help workplaces and workers make better health choices. Welcome, Duncan.
Good day, everyone. Firstly, I'd just like to say thanks to WorkSafe Tas for having Cancer Council here. I'd also like to say on behalf of the Cancer Council Tasmania that we acknowledge the Indigenous original inhabitants of Tasmania, and we acknowledge traditional custodians past and present. We also acknowledge emerging elders within the Indigenous community, and we pay respects to those who are present here today. And I'd like to just also talk a little bit about the mission that Cancer Council Tasmania has, so that you're aware of what we do. We provide support for Tasmanians affected by cancer. We also provide, sorry, I've lost, I need to get, apologies for that. So at Cancer Council Tasmania, we provide support for people affected by cancer, which includes providing support for people who require practical support. We do thousands of kilometres with transport to treatment, and we have support centres all around the state. We also provide cancer prevention information services, and part of our cancer prevention information is we work around the entire community, working with school groups, workplaces, and we also work with community groups to help increase their knowledge. We also provide a lot of the funding that we gets provided to cancer research and cancer prevention, which focuses on cancer prevention and research in ways to reduce people's cancer risk. We know that cancer affects many Tasmanians, and we know that 9 Tasmanians a day are diagnosed with cancer. We also know that because of that, many people may be affected or have a personal cancer connection. And if people need to tap out of the session or take some time out, that's fine. We also would like people to know that, yeah, they can touch base, and I can provide some information that at the end of the session. So we talk about 8 different messages, and today we're going to focus on being SunSmart. So 2 out of 3 Australians are diagnosed with some form of skin cancer by the time they're 70. What we do know is that that's a range of different cancers, so it might be something that's, I guess, that just requires a moderate level of treatment or intervention. And these forms of cancer are vary. So we have basal cell carcinomas, which are cancers that grow on areas that are exposed to the skin, and they are unlikely to spread to other areas. Squamous cell carcinomas, they also occur on areas exposed to the sun more regularly, like the head, lip, ears, and then they can spread to other parts of the body if undetected. Melanoma is the most significant form of cancer, skin cancer, and can spread to other organs quite quickly if left untreated, but if found early is almost always treatable. So why we've got the image of this person here is what we are showing how UV damage contributes to the impact UV damage has on our skin and how it causes the damage that can lead to cancer. So this person is a truck driver who drove in the US on and it was exposed to sun damage on one side of his face. So that clearly shows a significant difference, and it shows how the sun can damage our skin. UV radiation is the key indicator of risk. So it's the key cause of risk. And what we know is that when the UV is 3 or above, that's the time when we are required to use sun protection. And at 3 or above, that's when we require using our sun protective measures. What we also know is that most people will associate their risk with the sun with heat, and we'll go through that a little bit more in a minute. But how people can find out about what the UV is doing is you can look at BOM, you can look at you can find out that information on weather services such as newspapers, and it's on the news at the weather readings. And this app is something that the SunSmart app is something that you can download, which tells you the recommended times. You can set reminders in your phone to help you apply your sunscreen when required. So we recommend people use the app to work out when they need to use sun protection. This video that we're about to show indicates why it's important to use sun protection regularly.
You spend more time in the sun than you think. Anywhere you go, UV from the sun will damage unprotected skin. And it just keeps adding up. The more time you spend unprotected in the sun, the greater the risk of cancer. And you'll never know when your number is up.
Okay, so that video it's quite important if you work in an outdoor setting because of the cumulative nature of UV damage. One of the key things that we really want people to be aware of is that if you're working in an outdoor setting, even when the UV is below 3 and you're outdoors regularly, is that sun protection is still required because of the cumulative nature of ultraviolet damage. So there's quite a few different factors that affect ultraviolet radiation, and these are the time of day. So that's when the sun is highest. It has the most UV impact. The time of year. So in Tasmania, traditionally the UV averages 3 or above from September through to the end of April. So that's the time where we really remind people to regularly check their the UV readings. Cloud cover, but one thing that's really important to remember with cloud cover is that you can still have higher UV readings on an overcast day, but heavy cloud cover will reduce UV significantly. So even if it's overcast, it's still important to check the UV rating. Reflectivity, now this is quite a critical one if you're an outdoor worker in a lot of different settings. For example, I used to work on fishing boats, and I've done work on roofs. So both water, working on zinc loom roofs, those kind of things they increase the reflectivity, so you're getting burnt from above and below. So your sun protection is really important, and you need to be aware of that when working around surfaces like glass. And also proximity to the equator. So the UV range where we talked about between September and May in Tasmania, that would be different. So if you went and worked somewhere else, that might be different. Altitude as well. So altitude, the ozone and the atmosphere is actually thinner, and so the UV is actually has more of a significant impact. UV versus heat. So this graph actually shows how UV and temperature are not always the same. So it might be warmer at a particular part of the day, but the UV may not be as great. So if you look at when the UV is 3 and above on this graph, you'll see that it doesn't necessarily align with the temperature. So being aware of your peak times of UV protection is critical. And I guess one of the key things that we talk about is your UV protective measures are as important as any other PPE or protective strategy that you might have to keep yourself safe in the workplace. So how do we protect ourselves? Slip. So slip on clothing, slop on sunscreen, slap on a hat, seeking shade, and sliding on sunnies. So all of these messages are quite well known. So if you look at having a broad range of protective methods, it's quite critical for protecting yourself. So the other thing that we want to talk about is actually what does skin cancer look like for people and how to be aware of it. So if you notice something on your skin like that's changing shape, or that it's raised, or that it doesn't have the same kind of shape all around and the border's different, it's worth checking out. If you notice something's increasing in size as well, that's critical. The other thing that we like to talk to people about is with being aware is changing color. So like if you notice something on your skin suddenly changing color, again, it's really important to check it out. Often when we get things checked out, there's something that's less benign, but it's worth getting checked out just for peace of mind. And if it is something, early detection is critical, and a new spot is really important. The other thing I'd like to add to this is that getting your skin checks regularly is really, really important, particularly if you're an outdoor worker. So what we want people to do is really be aware of following up with regular skin checks. One of the other things that we talk about too is how do we change some of the habits? Because when we talk to people about why they don't use sun protection, one of the key things is they talk about, that there's something that they used to doing and they've been doing it the same way the whole time. If we go to change a habit, often we try and we don't always get it right the first time, so we can start to think, oh, this is too hard. What we want people to remember is that the change to improving your sun protection is actually an up and down process, and it's about persistence and working through and making a bit of a plan in how you change things. So setting some goals, and this can be really good if you're working with a team where you're trying to change a bit of culture around you know, how they do things. So setting the goals first and then working out why it's important to set those goals, what it will mean to people, so that there's some motivation, and then looking at some of the barriers like forgetting or getting busy on a work site, and that's a really common one. And then looking at some strategies, so what you could do, and these examples are like using the SunSmart app, setting up reminders to reapply sunscreen, and then looking at, you know, who can support you. So friends and family, your GP, Cancer Council, and you know, for more information. Also asking your workmates to remind you is good, and remembering, you know, the messages of slip, slop, sleek and slide, and using the UV app and remembering it's UV and not heat, and also to check for the signs of skin cancer, and really critical, not just being aware of your own body, but also checking and making sure that, you know, you're getting regular skin checks. So I'll hand back over to Steph and we'll field any questions.
All right, thank you, Duncan, for your presentation today. So if anyone does have any questions for today's presenter, Duncan Giblin from Cancer Council Tasmania, please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit those questions. And if anyone does have any questions following today's presentation for Duncan about skin cancer or for the cancer in general, contact details for Cancer Council Tasmania are on your screen too.
I think, yeah, and just while we're waiting for any questions, I guess probably one of the things I'd really like to add is that actually taking that time to work out some strategies for yourself in relation to how you might, I guess, you know, make some of those changes, particularly if you're working every day in an outdoor environment. It's quite critical to improve what we can do in with our sun protection. So for example, I do some work outside of Cancer Council. I work with a trail building team, and one of the things we all do is we actually, as a team, we remind each other about reapplication of sunscreen. We have our meal times in shaded areas. We also do things like have smaller sunscreen packages to take with us rather than the big pump packs if we're out in the field where those things might be cumbersome, so that it's always on hand. And they're just little things that we've all changed as a team, and that's been really useful for us.
That's good. A few questions have come through, Duncan. So
Cool.
First, do regulations exist that require vehicles UV protection windows for drivers as well?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. I'm not aware of any regulations. I know that there are standards around tinting, and there is certainly different levels of UV exposure through glass. So what I can do is I can confirm some information around that and email that back to the group.
Thank you, Duncan. I recently saw a member of our team wearing a bracelet that changes colour when the UV is heightened. Is this something available from Cancer Council?
I'm actually not sure whether we retail that product. I haven't seen it in our retail list. And what I would be wary of is just making sure that whatever they were using was an evidence-based tool to give them an indicator, because it might be something that provides an indication, but it might not be completely accurate. So I'm not aware of those products.
All right, thanks, Duncan. You talked about signs and symptoms. Is there anything else that our listeners should be aware of when working with others?
Yeah, I think like again, that reapplying. So with sunscreen, it's really important to reapply it every 2 hours and making sure your team members are doing that. It's also important to remember that sunscreen itself is not the first line of defense, so it should be used as a supplementary thing. So if you can use other protective measures like hats, sunnies, long sleeve shirts, and trousers, protecting your skin is really important. Also, just on hats as well, like often you see a lot of people with caps. One of the big issues there with caps is that they don't cover your ears or the back of your neck. A lot of the old fishermen I used to work with are now getting lots of bits chopped off the top of their ears, and so on, just getting early skin cancers removed because they've been exposed all the time. So broad brim bucket hats or Legionnaires hats are the recommended standard, and there's some standards that you can find on our website around all those different items. Also, if you're looking for workplace clothing, if you can find stuff that has a swing tag that gives you a UV rating on there, that means you know your level of protection. And also with sunscreen, 30 SPF or above is recommended.
All right, just on the comment you've just made about 30 and above, so a couple of questions have come through regarding is it better to use SPF 30 or SPF 50, and is there a safer sunscreen to use?
Yeah, so the TGA review all the sunscreens that are available on the market, and the current Cancer Council position is that 30 SPF and above it will provide adequate protection if applied correctly. You will have increased protection with an SPF 50. And again, it really comes down to how you reapply it, which is critical, and also putting it on so it actually builds the protective layer on your skin like 20 minutes before you actually go outside is the recommendation.
All right, thanks, Duncan. Another question. I have spent several I have several outdoor council workers wanting to wear shorts during the summer, but council have declined this request due to sun safety. Is there a current requirement or something in legislation that clearly states that shorts cannot be worn during summer months, or should it be through council policy?
So as far as regulations go, I would have to refer to my learned colleagues at WorkSafe Tas in relation to regulation around garments for local government workers. What I would say is that it's a recommendation from the Cancer Council that people wear long sleeve clothing. And what I can do is I can actually touch base with some of the inspectors at WorkSafe Tas and we can find out, and I can send that through. But I guess my take on it would be that, we all now wear, in our trail team, we all now wear long sleeve clothing. Sometimes it's not as comfortable on a hotter day, but it's certainly more comfortable than having treatment for skin cancer.
Thanks, Duncan. Is it too late to begin using sunscreen if you have spent your life in the sun?
That's an excellent question, and it's a really good one for blokes, because often if we haven't been doing stuff well because we didn't know things back in the day, we kind of think, oh, well, I'm either, to use a phrase recently, I'm either overcooked or I'm not from someone. So I've had a very similar conversation with someone, and the answer is that it is never too late to use protective methods. And the thing is, if you went and then did a skin check and you found out that you were in, you didn't have anything that was of concern there, and you continue to use sunscreen, you'd be protecting yourself, and you can also check and see what level of UV damage that you have had, and if you find something early, we just can't stress how important that is to get skin checks, because the earlier you find something, the better it is. And often guys will think, well, I haven't done this properly before, so I don't want to know, or I won't look into it. So we recommend using the appropriate protective strategies, no matter how long you haven't been doing it or what age you are, because it's only going to provide a benefit.
Thank you. And there's still time to submit questions to our presenter today from Cancer Council Tasmania, Duncan Giblin, and the presentation is SunSmart in the workplace. Duncan, another question. Is there any different advice for people with pale skin, or I guess just probably to add to that for different types of skin?
Yeah, and again, another excellent question. So different skin pigmentation will respond differently to UV radiation. The advice that we give people is that the standards, the recommendations and the standards that are there cover all skin types. And also assuming if you have a darker skin type that you don't need sun protection is not actually true. You still require sun protection, and someone we've been working with has been providing support for other Tasmanians to learn about skin cancer. Is someone who has like a darker skin and has had melanoma removed. So what we want people to be aware of is, regardless of skin type, it's always important to follow those protective strategies, but also, if you do have fairer skin, you do have higher risk.
All right, thank you. Is there a risk of the sunscreen containing carcinogenic compounds in their makeup? Yeah,
so with all sunscreens in Australia, they all have to be approved by the Therapeutic Goods Association, and one of the things that they do is they constantly review all those products that are available to the market. So whenever there's new information comes out, all of those products are under review. So basically the products that are for sale in Australia are deemed safe by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and again, that's always under review to see if there are any improvements to be made.
All right, thanks, Duncan. Question: with our current level of training, PPE is known as the last resort in the hierarchy of control. This is obviously not the case when it comes to sun protection.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing, because again, you look at shade, if you look at it from a risk management, that's the key form of substitution. You're removing or working at night, but they're not practical solutions. So that's why PPE has a higher prevalence in the recommendations in relation to sun protection, because sometimes it's just not practical to actually complete the occupational task by being in the shade. So that's why we put such a strong emphasis on it, and that's why as a protective measure it's so important, because you can't always provide substitution at the other level of hierarchy of risk.
Thanks, Duncan. Is the ozone layer still a problem, and will it increase UV penetration?
Okay, so this is a really interesting one, because there's often the talk about the hole in the ozone over Tasmania and things like that. The reason why people feel that they get burnt more in Tassie is because the UV might be the same on a given day, but the actual air temperature or the apparent air temperature is lower because we're moderated by the seat. So the short answer to that is that if there is future reductions in ozone, then that would increase UV and UV vulnerability. However, the CFC-based ozone depletion is no longer an issue.
Thanks, Duncan. Another question around sunscreen. Occasionally there are reports in the media that some sunscreens may contain chemicals that cause cancer. Should we only buy reputable brands?
Look, all sunscreens for sale in Australia have to be approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So the TGA approve sunscreens based on their level of risk to the community. So they look at all the compounds in there, and yeah, so buying reputable brands means, you know, from a retailer means that you're purchasing a product that has been approved for use and deemed as safe in Australia.
Thanks, Duncan. And our final question for today, if you have a mole on your head, hidden amongst your hair, should you still be concerned about it?
Yeah, so, and that's a great question, because one of the things that we also know is that skin cancers can appear in areas where the sun doesn't always reach a lot. So anything that you're concerned about, we'd recommend that you go and get checked. So if it's under your hair or an area where that's normally under clothing, it's really important to still get that checked.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And so now we'll wrap up today's webinar. So thank you very much to Duncan Giblin from the Cancer Council Tasmania, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, SunSmart in the Workplace. You will receive a survey at the end of today's presentation. Please, we ask that you do provide us with your feedback. Today's webinar has also been recorded. To find out more about WorkSafe Tasmania Month and other initiatives funded by the WorkCover Tasmania Board, delivered by WorkSafe Tasmania, please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au. On behalf of the WorkCover Tasmania Board and WorkSafe Tasmania, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.